When Karen invited me to her latest adventure, I had no idea what I was stepping into. Swing parties. Sure, I'd heard of them, but they were always a topic of curiosity, not action. Yet, here I was, standing in my bedroom, holding two dresses and wondering which one said, "I'm open-minded but not desperate." I settled on the black one, a knee-length, slightly snug number that hinted at confidence I wasn't sure I had. Karen said, "Don't overthink it." Easy for her to say. She was a veteran of these things. Me. I was the rookie with no idea if I should bring wine, a handshake, or both. When we arrived, I was surprised by how normal it all looked. The house was tasteful, the music mellow, and the crowd surprisingly diverse. It wasn't the carnival of chaos I'd imagined. But then again, maybe the chaos was beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Karen introduced me to a few people, and I realized quickly that the vibe was casual, at least outwardly. I made small talk, accepted a glass of wine, and began to relax. These people weren't the caricatures I'd expected. They were funny, charming, and utterly disarming. And then the games began. Not your average board game night kind of games, these were more exploratory. My heart raced as people partnered off for the first round of an icebreaker. It was tame enough, just a card game with flirty undertones, but I could feel the boundaries of my comfort zone being nudged, gently but firmly. Karen nudged me too. "Relax," she whispered. "You're in control here. Do what feels right." For a while, I watched from the sidelines, observing the delicate dance of connection happening around me. There were moments that made me laugh, awkward introductions and fumbled attempts at flirting. But there were also moments when I felt like an outsider looking in on a world I didn't quite belong to. Then came the question I hadn't prepared for. "What do you want out of tonight?" It wasn't Karen who asked. It was one of the guests, a man with a soft voice and an easy smile. The question was simple, yet it hung in the air like a challenge. Did I want adventure? Validation? A story to tell? "I'm not sure," I admitted. And that was the truth. But as the night unfolded, I began to discover more than I'd anticipated. Not just about the people around me, but about myself. It wasn't just the excitement or the tension that stayed with me. It was the realization that this world, strange as it seemed, had lessons to offer. As the night progressed, the lines between curiosity and discomfort began to blur. I stayed close to Karen, who had seamlessly integrated into the crowd like she'd done this 1,000 times. She laughed easily, her presence magnetic, drawing people to her like moths to a flame. Meanwhile, I lingered on the periphery, still sipping my wine and wondering how much of myself I was willing to share with this room of strangers. A pair of guests introduced themselves, Michael and Lisa, a couple with warm smiles and easy conversation. They spoke about how long they'd been part of the community, their openness about it surprising me. "It's not for everyone," Lisa said, her voice carrying both understanding and caution. "But if you're curious, take your time. You'll know when something feels right or wrong." Her words stuck with me as I ventured a little further into the room. There was a softness to the evening, a rhythm that ebbed and flowed as people connected. It wasn't the frantic chaos I'd feared, but it wasn't entirely comfortable either. I began to see that this wasn't just about thrill-seeking or indulgence. For some, it seemed almost therapeutic, like a space to shed their everyday selves and explore another side of their identity. I struck up a conversation with a man named Julian. He was charming in a subtle way, the kind of person who didn't fill the silence with noise but made you feel okay sitting in it. We talked about travel, books, and a little bit about what brought us here. I found myself laughing at his dry humor, a part of me relaxing for the first time all evening. Then came the first moment that caught me off guard. Karen was across the room talking to a small group. She looked over at me, her eyes sparkling with encouragement. "Come join us," she called, her tone light but insistent. I hesitated, glancing at Julian, who smiled encouragingly. "You don't have to," he said softly, sensing my internal struggle. "But if you're curious, they're good people. It's always okay to say no." I nodded, appreciating his words more than I could express. With a deep breath, I crossed the room and joined Karen's group. They were playing a game, something about drawing cards and answering questions. I listened, intrigued, as people revealed surprising tidbits about themselves. The questions were harmless at first. What's your favorite vacation spot? Or what's the craziest thing you've ever done? But they grew more personal as the game went on. When it was my turn, I drew a card. The question read, "What's something you've always wanted to try but never had the courage to?" Froze. The room grew quieter as they waited for my answer. Karen gave me a reassuring nod, her expression saying, "This is your moment." "Honestly," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "is being here. Trying to figure out where I fit in all of this." A murmur of understanding rippled through the group. It was a vulnerable admission, but it felt freeing. For the first time that night, I wasn't just observing. I was participating. As the night wore on, the room seemed to transform. What began as scattered groups of laughter and quiet conversation evolved into something more unified, like we were all part of a subtle dance we didn't know we were learning. It wasn't chaotic, nor was it overly structured. It was somewhere in between, a space where connections were formed and curiosity thrived. Karen, ever the social butterfly, floated effortlessly between groups. Meanwhile, I stayed close to Julian, who had become something of a safe haven for me in this unfamiliar world. His easy demeanor and knack for steering conversations away from discomfort helped me navigate the evening without feeling out of place. "I've noticed something about these parties," he said at one point, leaning casually against the edge of a small table. "The unspoken rules are more important than the spoken ones." "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely intrigued. He took a sip of his drink and smiled. "It's all about awareness. Reading the room, understanding boundaries without anyone having to spell them out. The people who come here aren't just looking for fun, they're looking for respect." It made sense, but it also made me wonder. What were my own unspoken rules? Where did my boundaries lie? And how far was I willing to push them? These questions swirled in my mind as the evening unfolded. At one point, Karen called me over to join another game. This one was a bit more interactive, involving partners and light, playful challenges. I paired with Julian, grateful for his calming presence. The tasks were harmless. An arm wrestling match here, a word association game there. But each one brought a level of intimacy I hadn't anticipated. By the end of it, I found myself laughing more freely, the tension in my shoulders easing with each shared smile and joke. "See," Karen teased as she passed by. "I told you this would be fun." And it was, until it wasn't. The moment snuck up on me like a sudden chill in the air. One of the other guests, a man whose name I hadn't caught, leaned in a little too close during a conversation. His hand brushed my arm in a way that felt more presumptive than friendly. My body tensed, the laughter from moments ago dissolving into unease. Julian noticed immediately. "Hey," he said smoothly, stepping between us with a kind of calm authority that didn't need to raise its voice. "Why don't we grab another drink?" He turned to me with a reassuring smile, his eyes silently asking if I was okay. I nodded, grateful for the out. As we moved to the kitchen, I realized how important those unspoken agreements were. It wasn't just about setting boundaries, it was about having people around who respected them. "You didn't have to do that," I said, though I was relieved he had. "I know," he replied. "But you looked like you needed a breather." He wasn't wrong. The moment was a stark reminder that this environment, for all its intrigue and allure, wasn't without its challenges. It required constant self-awareness, a vigilance I hadn't anticipated. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. He nodded, not pressing for more. The night continued, but my guard stayed up. I realized that part of navigating this space meant knowing when to step back. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would stay curious, but I wouldn't sacrifice my comfort or safety for the sake of the experience. The hours seemed to blur together as the party hit its peak. The music grew softer, the conversations deeper, and the room settled into a kind of calm intensity. People leaned closer when they spoke, their gestures more fluid, their laughter quieter but no less sincere. It was a strange mix of comfort and tension, like standing at the edge of something vast and uncertain. Karen was still in her element, a social chameleon blending seamlessly into every group she joined. I admired her ease, her ability to thrive in this environment, but I didn't envy it. For me, every interaction felt weighted, every glance a quiet negotiation of boundaries. Julian stuck by my side for most of the evening. It wasn't overbearing or possessive. He simply seemed to sense that I needed the grounding presence. We drifted between conversations, joining small clusters of guests for light-hearted games or discussions about everything from travel to art. I felt like I was finally settling into the rhythm of the night when a new question surfaced in my mind. What happens next? It was an innocent enough thought, but its implications loomed large. This party wasn't just a social gathering. It was a space where people explored connections in ways I wasn't entirely ready for. The realization was both sobering and clarifying. I didn't need to figure everything out tonight. I could just be present, learn, and take what I needed from the experience. At one point, a woman named Sophie struck up a conversation with Julian and me. She had an effortless charm, her smile both disarming and inviting. As we talked, the conversation shifted to the idea of trust in spaces like these. "It's not just about what you're willing to try," Sophie said, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "It's about knowing who you can trust to share that space with you. Trust changes everything." Her words resonated with me. I looked around the room, noticing the small but significant gestures of care between guests, the way someone offered a drink, how another asked permission before stepping closer. These weren't just courtesies. They were acts of respect that made this environment feel, if not entirely safe, at least mindful. Later, Karen found me sitting on one of the plush couches near the edge of the room. She plopped down beside me, her cheeks flushed from a mix of wine and exhilaration. "Having fun?" she asked, her voice teasing but warm. I smiled, though it felt a little strained. "It's been interesting." Karen raised an eyebrow, clearly picking up on the hesitancy in my tone. "You don't have to dive into the deep end, you know. Just wade in and see how the water feels." That was the thing about Karen. She always knew when to push and when to pull back. "I think I'm okay just watching tonight," I admitted. She nodded, her expression softening. "There's no wrong way to do this. Just do what feels right." Her reassurance was exactly what I needed. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of quiet observation and thoughtful conversation. I didn't make any bold moves or take any risks. Instead, I focused on understanding myself and what I wanted, or didn't want, from this experience. As the party began to wind down, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief for having navigated the night on my own terms. Gratitude for the kindness and respect I'd encountered. And curiosity, still simmering beneath the surface, waiting for another time. I was beginning to think I had found my groove, floating between conversations, soaking in the atmosphere without committing too much. Julian's presence continued to anchor me, and Karen's playful nudges added just the right amount of encouragement to keep me from retreating completely. For a moment, I let myself believe the night would end quietly, without any surprises. But surprises have a way of finding you when you least expect them. It started innocently enough. A couple I hadn't spoken to yet, Emma and James, approached me near the snack table. They were charming and disarming, their easy banter laced with humor that made me laugh despite my initial hesitation. "First time at one of these?" Emma asked with a knowing smile. "Is it that obvious?" I replied, my cheeks flushing. "Not at all," James said smoothly. "You carry yourself like you belong here." It was a nice thing to say, but I wasn't sure I believed it. Still, their warmth put me at ease, and before I knew it, I was caught up in a game they'd suggested, one that involved sharing little-known facts about ourselves. It was harmless, light-hearted fun, but it didn't stay that way for long. As the game progressed, the questions became more personal. Not scandalous, but probing in a way that made me realize how much I'd kept my walls up all night. Emma's questions were playful yet perceptive, her words coaxing out answers I hadn't planned to give. What's something you've always been afraid of but secretly wanted to try? She asked, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I hesitated, glancing around the room as if the answer might be written on the walls. Julian caught my gaze from across the room and gave me a small, encouraging nod. I took a deep breath. Letting go, I said finally. Not overthinking. Just being in the moment. Emma's smile widened. That's a good one. The game ended shortly after, but the words lingered. Letting go. Could I do that? Did I want to? I'd spent the entire evening carefully guarding my space, observing from the edges, dipping a toe into the water without ever stepping fully in. But now, standing there in the soft glow of the room, I wondered if I was holding back out of caution or fear. Before I could dwell on it, Karen swept in with her usual whirlwind energy. There's something you've got to see, she said, pulling me toward a smaller room down the hallway. I tried to protest, but she was insistent, her excitement contagious. The room was quieter, more intimate, with just a handful of people inside. The energy here was different, not louder or wilder, but sharper somehow, like every interaction carried more weight. Karen left me near the doorway, promising she'd be back in a minute. I stood there, unsure of what to do, when Emma appeared again. This is where things get interesting, she said with a wink. I laughed nervously, my heart pounding. Define interesting. Emma didn't answer. Instead, she gestured toward a group seated in a semicircle, their conversation low but animated. It was clear that they were comfortable with each other in a way I wasn't yet comfortable with anyone here. You don't have to stay, Emma said softly, her tone genuine. But if you do, just remember, you're in control of your own experience. Her words echoed what Julian and Karen had said earlier, but coming from her, standing in that moment, they felt like more than advice. They felt like permission. I stayed for a while, watching, listening, and marveling at the layers of connection unfolding in front of me. It wasn't about the thrill or the risk. It was about trust, respect, and the quiet, unspoken agreements that held it all together. By the time I left the room, my head was spinning, not from wine, but from the realization that I didn't need to have it all figured out. It was enough to be curious, to explore, and to know that I could always draw the line when I needed to. That night, as Karen and I drove home, she looked at me with a sly smile. So, she said, did you have fun? I thought about the conversations, the laughter, the moments of uncertainty and clarity. I thought about Julian's kindness, Emma's wisdom, and the strange but undeniable sense of connection I'd felt with everyone in the room. Yeah, I said finally. I think I did. The car ride home was quiet, but my thoughts were anything but. Karen hummed along to the soft music playing on the radio, content and unbothered as usual. I, on the other hand, couldn't stop replaying the night in my mind. Every conversation, every glance, every moment of vulnerability felt like pieces of a puzzle I was just beginning to understand. Okay, Karen said suddenly, breaking the silence. Bill, what did you think? I hesitated, unsure how to put it into words. It was more than I expected. Not what I expected, but definitely more. Karen laughed, her eyes sparkling in the glow of the streetlights. That's usually how it goes. When I got home, I kicked off my heels, poured myself a glass of water, and sank onto the couch. The night had been a whirlwind, a blend of excitement, unease, and curiosity that left me feeling raw but strangely fulfilled. I opened my journal, thinking maybe I could make sense of it all on paper, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stared at the blank page, letting the emotions settle. The next day I went about my usual routine, but everything felt different. At work, I caught myself smiling at random moments, replaying snippets of the night before. It wasn't the thrill of the party itself that stuck with me. It was the connections I'd made and the things I'd learned about myself. That evening, a text from Julian popped up on my phone. Julian. Hey, just wanted to check in. How are you feeling after last night? I hesitated before typing back. Me, honestly. A little overwhelmed. But in a good way. Thanks for being so steady. Help. His reply came almost immediately. Julian, anytime. I meant what I said. You don't have to figure it all out at once. It's a journey, not a sprint. That was the thing about Julian. He had a way of grounding me even through a screen. I stared at his message for a while, feeling a wave of gratitude for the people who had made the night what it was. They weren't perfect, but they were kind, open, and honest in a way that was rare to find. Later that week, Karen and I met for coffee. She was already at our usual spot, scrolling through her phone when I arrived. As soon as she saw me, she grinned. "You look different," she said, her tone teasing. "Did last night turn you into a whole new person?" I rolled my eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. "Not exactly. I think it shifted something." Karen leaned forward, her expression softening. "That's what these things do. It's not about the parties. It's about the freedom to ask yourself what you really want. And you don't have to have all the answers right away." Her words echoed Julian's, and I felt a small, warm glow of understanding. The night hadn't been about indulgence or rebellion. It had been about discovery. About standing at the edge of something unfamiliar and deciding, moment by moment, how far I was willing to go. "So," Karen asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief, "would you go again?" I laughed, taking a sip of my coffee. "Maybe. But next time I'll be doing it my way." And that was the truth. The experience wasn't about conformity or fitting into someone else's world. It was about finding my place within it. Setting boundaries, exploring curiosities, and embracing the journey one step at a time.